Now, former Prime Minister Scott Morrison has revealed that his decision to keep AUKUS secret from the French wasn't because he couldn't trust Emmanuel Macron, but because he was worried Joe Biden wasn't locked into AUKUS. Morrison made the comments in a soon-to-be-released book, The Secret History of the Five Eyes, by journalist in Britain Richard Korbaj. Here is Scott Morrison speaking overnight in London at the British think tank Policy Exchange.
I describe AUKUS as a highest common denominator partnership. Highest common denominator, as you say, on the values, but highest common denominator also on the level of trust between these three partners, which I would argue there is no greater trilateral partnership on the planet in terms of trust between the partners than this partnership.
OK, let's bring in Peter Jennings, former Executive Director of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Peter, welcome. Look, do you think this is actually true, this claim that the reason Morrison kept AUKUS secret from the French was that he wasn't sure that Biden was completely locked in? I mean, it seems to me that both would have been true, that he ultimately couldn't trust either Macron or Biden.
Well, I think, Sharri, that Morrison wanted to make sure that the American system was going to make a really big change, and that was depart from what had always been a no as far as the Americans were concerned for years. When I was Deputy Secretary for Defence, for Strategy in the Defence Department, I had 3 conversations with the Americans about whether or not they would consider opening up nuclear propulsion to Australia, and the answer was no on each occasion. So Biden was critical, and I think my understanding is it took him some time to be persuaded that this was the right thing to do. So I share Scott Morrison's sense of caution about that, because he clearly didn't want to have both a disaster in Paris and a disaster in Washington, D.C. He needed to have AUKUS locked in before he could walk from the French arrangement, as tough as that was. And ultimately, you know, that was I think the right decision, but one he had to be very careful to make sure was completely locked in before he could announce it.
Yeah, could be the right decision, but the whole mess is extremely costly to Australia. Now, the US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has just completed a tour of Beijing. This is part of helping to rebuild the US-China relationship. But President Biden then went and described Chinese President Xi Jinping as a dictator of a country with real economic difficulties. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has, as would be expected, they've hit back. They've said the comments are absurd and irresponsible. Well, they might be, but they're true. But Peter, this does seem like inconsistent foreign policy when you've got the President and the US Secretary of State, you know, making opposite remarks at the same time.
Well, you know, this is one occasion where I think Joe Biden gets it right, Sharri. I mean, what is Xi Jinping if he is not a dictator? That is very clearly the style of his leadership in China. And it reminds me a little bit about when the president is consistently asked about, will America come to the defence of Taiwan? And Biden has on 4 occasions said yes. And then his own administration tries to walk back from that to preserve some ambiguity about it. I think it's a good thing, Sharri, that the president is telling the truth to the American people and indeed to a global audience. You know, make no mistake that in dealing with modern China under Xi Jinping, you're dealing with a dictatorship, an authoritarian dictatorship. And that has to inform how America does business with Beijing, just as it really should inform how we do business with Beijing as well.
All right, Peter Jennings, thank you very much for your insights tonight. Appreciate them as always.